Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where tradition and protocol rule every breath, a single moment of defiance would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. When a decorated royal guard chose loyalty over orders, and a beloved princess found herself at the center of a storm that would expose the hidden fractures within the royal household, nobody could have predicted how far the ripples would spread.
This is the story of how a rugby match invitation became the spark that ignited years of simmering tensions, revealing the human cost of royal duty and the price of standing up for what's right. In a world where every gesture is scrutinized and every word carries weight, sometimes the most powerful acts of rebellion come from the most unexpected places. What happens when the people sworn to protect the crown must choose between their oath and their conscience? When staff members who have served in silence for decades finally find their voice? And when a princess discovers that even within palace walls she must fight for her right to make her own choices? The answer would reshape everything the public thought they knew about life behind closed doors, and prove that even in the most controlled environment on Earth, the human spirit refuses to be silenced. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, opened her personal correspondence in the Oak Room. Among the usual stack of formal invitations and charity requests lay an envelope that would soon turn her world upside down. The Wales Rugby Union logo gleamed on the thick paper, and her heart lifted as she read the invitation to serve as patron for their upcoming championship match against England. Catherine had always been passionate about rugby. Long before she married into the royal family, she had played the sport at university, her competitive spirit and natural athleticism making her a formidable presence on the field. When she became Princess of Wales, accepting patronage of Welsh rugby felt like a perfect marriage of duty and personal passion. She could still remember the thrill of running with the ball, the satisfaction of a well-executed tackle, the camaraderie that came from being part of a team working toward a common goal. But as she reached for her phone to call her private secretary to accept the invitation, she noticed something that made her pause. A sticky note attached to the envelope, written in the careful handwriting of her senior aide, read simply, "Please discuss with household before responding." The phrase seemed innocent enough, but Catherine had been part of the royal family long enough to recognize a warning when she saw one. She walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where tourists gathered beyond the gates, cameras ready to capture any glimpse of royal life. These people had no idea of the constant negotiations that happened behind these walls, the delicate balance between personal desires and institutional expectations. They saw the glamour and the privilege, but they couldn't see the invisible chains that bound every action, every word, every public appearance. The call to her private secretary, James Morrison, confirmed her suspicions. His voice carried the careful neutrality that royal staff used when delivering unwelcome news. The rugby union had extended the invitation without going through proper channels, he explained. The palace communications team needed time to evaluate the optics, especially given the current political climate around Welsh independence discussions. There were concerns about the princess appearing to favor Wales over England, potential conflicts with existing patronages, and the usual maze of protocol that surrounded every royal decision. Catherine felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest. She understood the need for careful consideration of her public role, but this was rugby, not a political statement. Her love for the sport was genuine, her connection to Wales real and meaningful. When she and William had moved to Anglesey early in their marriage, she had fallen in love with the Welsh people, their warmth, their humor, their fierce pride in their heritage. Supporting Welsh rugby wasn't about politics. It was about celebrating a culture and sport she genuinely admired. Over the next several days, Catherine found herself caught in a web of meetings, consultations, and endless discussions about the invitation. The communications team presented charts and graphs about public perception. The constitutional experts weighed in about precedent and protocol. The press office worried about headlines and social media reaction. Everyone had an opinion about what the Princess of Wales should or shouldn't do, except apparently the Princess of Wales herself. Meanwhile, Captain David Hughes, a senior member of the Palace Guard who had served the royal family for 15 years, watched these proceedings with growing unease. But David had been assigned to Catherine's security detail for the past 3 years, and in that time he had developed tremendous respect for her dedication to her role and her genuine care for the people she met. He had seen her comfort grieving families, encourage young athletes, and work tirelessly for her charities, often going far beyond what was required or expected. David himself was Welsh, born and raised in Cardiff, where rugby wasn't just a sport but a way of life. His father had played for the local club, his brother coached youth teams, and David had grown up understanding that rugby was woven into the fabric of Welsh identity. When he heard about the invitation and the palace's hesitation, he felt a deep sense of disappointment. Here was an opportunity for the princess to connect with his homeland in a meaningful way, and it was being tied up in red tape and political calculations. The breaking point came during a staff meeting that David wasn't supposed to overhear.
He had been standing guard outside the conference room when voices inside began to rise. Through the heavy oak door, he could hear fragments of a heated discussion about the rugby invitation. One senior official was arguing that accepting would send the wrong message about royal neutrality, another worried about the precedent it might set for future requests. A third voice suggested that the princess's personal preferences were less important than institutional considerations. But it was the final comment that made David's blood run cold.
Perhaps it's time the princess learned that her role comes with certain limitations, came the voice of Sir Edmund Worthington, a longtime palace administrator known for his rigid interpretation of royal protocol. Personal desires must always be secondary to duty.
If she cannot accept that, perhaps she needs a firmer hand in managing her schedule. David had heard enough. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, but he had always interpreted that to mean protecting them as people, not just as symbols.
The idea that Catherine should be treated like a child who needed to be managed rather than a grown woman capable of making thoughtful decisions about her own patronages struck him as fundamentally wrong. That evening, as David finished his shift, he made a decision that would change everything.
Instead of going through proper channels, instead of filing a formal report or requesting a meeting with his superiors, he approached Catherine directly. Protocol demanded that he speak to her through her private secretary or equerry, but David felt the situation called for directness rather than diplomacy. He found Catherine in the palace library reading briefing papers for her upcoming engagements. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of an antique clock and the rustle of papers. When she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, she could immediately tell that something was troubling him. "Your Royal Highness," David began, his voice steady despite the gravity of what he was about to do. "I need to speak with you about the rugby invitation." Catherine set down her papers, recognizing the seriousness in his tone. David had always been professional but warm in their interactions, and she had come to value his straightforward manner and obvious dedication to his duty. If he was approaching her like this, it meant something significant was happening. "I've been serving this family for 15 years, David continued, stepping into the room but maintaining a respectful distance. "I've always believed that my job was to protect you, not just physically but in every way possible. And right now, I believe you're not being protected from people who are more interested in maintaining their own power than in supporting your judgment and your connection to the people you serve." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. No member of staff had ever spoken to her so directly about internal palace politics. The carefully maintained facade of unified support was cracking, revealing the tensions and disagreements that usually stayed hidden behind closed doors. "What exactly are you saying, David?" she asked quietly. David took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either end his career or begin something unprecedented. "I'm saying that you should accept that rugby invitation, Your Royal Highness."
Not because I'm Welsh and want to see Wales rugby supported, though I do, but because I've watched you work for 3 years, and I know you make decisions based on genuine care for people and causes.
Your instincts about this are right, and the people trying to talk you out of it are wrong. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever.
Catherine studied David's face, seeing the conviction in his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he knew exactly what he was risking by speaking so plainly. Finally she spoke. "And if I accept the invitation against the advice of my household?" David straightened, his military training evident in his bearing. "Then I'll be honored to serve as your protection officer for that event. Or Royal Highness, whatever the consequences." Catherine felt something shift inside her, a sense of clarity that had been missing for days. Here was someone who understood what she was trying to accomplish, who saw her as a person capable of making good decisions, rather than a symbol that needed to be carefully managed. The support felt both surprising and deeply validating. "Thank you, David," she said simply. "I'll consider what you've said." But David wasn't finished. "There's something else you should know, Your Royal Highness. You're not alone in feeling frustrated by how this has been handled. There are others on staff who believe you're being treated unfairly, who think your judgment on matters like this should be trusted. If you decide to move forward with the rugby patronage, you might be surprised by how much support you have." As David left the library, Catherine remained at her desk, staring out the window at the darkening sky. For the first time since receiving the invitation, she felt a sense of possibility rather than frustration. The decision was still hers to make, but now she understood that making it wouldn't mean standing alone against the entire institutional machinery of the monarchy. The next morning, Catherine called James Morrison and informed him that she would be accepting the Wales Rugby Union invitation. The silence on the other end of the line was telling, followed by a carefully worded reminder about the concerns that had been raised and the importance of following proper procedures.
I understand the concerns, Catherine replied, her voice calm but firm, and I've given them careful consideration. However, I believe this is the right decision, and I'm prepared to take responsibility for it. The news of her decision spread quickly through the palace corridors. In the communications office, phones began ringing as staff scrambled to manage the messaging around an announcement that hadn't been fully vetted through their usual process. In the Constitutional Affairs Department, advisors began pulling precedents and preparing memos about the implications of the decision. But perhaps most significantly, in the servants' quarters and guard rooms, word spread that the Princess of Wales had stood her ground on something she believed in.
Mary Thompson, who had served as a housemaid in the palace for over 20 years, heard about it from her supervisor and felt a surge of admiration. She had watched Catherine grow into her role, had seen her kindness to staff and her genuine interest in their lives and families. The idea that the princess was being criticized for wanting to support Welsh rugby struck Mary as deeply unfair. "It's about time someone stood up to those stuffed shirts in the front office," Mary confided to her colleague Sarah during their lunch break. "This is the book. It's about history. The princess works harder than any of them, and she actually cares about the people she meets. If she thinks supporting Welsh rugby is a good idea, then I trust her judgment over theirs." Similar conversations were happening throughout the palace. Security guards who had watched Catherine's genuine interactions with the public voiced their support. Kitchen staff who had seen her take time to thank them personally for special events expressed their approval. Gardeners who had observed her genuine interest in the palace grounds and their work felt that her judgment should be trusted. The divide was becoming clear. On one side stood the senior administrators, communications experts, and constitutional advisors who viewed royal decisions through the lens of institutional protection and political calculation. On the other side were the people who worked most closely with Catherine on a daily basis, who had observed her character and judgment firsthand, and who believed she deserved the trust and support of her household rather than constant supervision and second-guessing. Sir Edmund Worthington, sensing that his authority was being challenged, called an emergency meeting of senior staff. The agenda was officially about maintaining proper protocols and communication channels, but everyone in the room understood that this was really about reasserting institutional control over a princess who was showing signs of independent thinking. "The Princess of Wales appears to have been influenced by inappropriate counsel," Sir Edmund announced to the assembled group. "Moving forward, we need to ensure that all communication with Her Royal Highness goes through proper channels and that she understands the importance of following established procedures." James Morrison, Catherine's private secretary, found himself in an uncomfortable position. While he personally admired the princess and believed in her judgment, he also understood the institutional pressures and the importance of maintaining order within the household. "Perhaps we should focus on supporting Her Royal Highness's decision now that it's been made," he suggested carefully, "and work on improving our communication processes for the future." But Sir Edmund wasn't interested in compromise. "What we need to focus on is discipline," he replied sharply. "If staff members are going to circumvent established procedures and provide unauthorized advice to members of the royal family, there need to be consequences." The threat was clear, and everyone in the room understood its target. Captain David Hughes had broken protocol by speaking directly to Catherine, and now he was going to pay the price for his initiative. The next morning, David received orders to report to Sir Edmund's office. As he walked through the palace corridors, he passed several colleagues who gave him encouraging nods or supportive glances. Word of his conversation with Catherine hadn't spread officially, but in the tight-knit community of palace staff, news traveled quickly through informal channels. When David entered Sir Edmund's office, he found the senior administrator behind his imposing mahogany desk, surrounded by the portraits and ceremonial objects that emphasized the weight of royal tradition. Sir Edmund didn't invite David to sit, leaving him standing at attention like a soldier facing court-martial. "Captain Hughes," Sir Edmund began, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience, "it has come to my attention that you have been providing unauthorized counsel to Her Royal Highness regarding matters outside your area of responsibility. This represents a serious breach of protocol and a violation of your duty as a member of the Palace Guard." David remained silent, his military training helping him maintain composure despite the anger building inside him. He had expected this confrontation, but hearing his actions described as a betrayal of duty felt like a personal attack on everything he had worked for over 15 years of service. Sir Edmund continued, clearly enjoying the exercise of power. "Effective immediately, you are being transferred from the Princess of Wales security detail.
You will report to the Administrative Security Office for reassignment to duties more appropriate to your rank and experience. Perhaps some time in a less prominent position will help you remember the importance of staying within proper boundaries. The dismissal was both a punishment and a warning to other staff members who might be tempted to show similar initiative. But as David left the office, he felt no regret for his actions. He had done what he believed was right, supporting someone he respected in making a decision that reflected her genuine values and commitments. What Sir Edmund hadn't anticipated was the reaction his punishment would generate among the other staff members who had come to respect both David's character and Catherine's leadership. The transfer wasn't announced publicly, but within the palace community word spread quickly that a good man was being punished for supporting the princess's right to make her own decisions. Mary Thompson was among the first to hear the news, and her reaction was swift and decisive. She had worked in the palace long enough to understand how things usually operated, with staff members keeping their heads down and following orders without question. But she had also worked long enough to recognize injustice when she saw it, and this felt like a clear case of a good person being punished for doing the right thing. That afternoon, as Catherine made her way through the palace for her scheduled appointments, she began to notice subtle changes in how the staff interacted with her. There were more direct eye contact, warmer smiles, and a sense of solidarity that hadn't been there before. When she paused to thank Mary Thompson for the exceptional care of her private quarters, Mary looked directly at her and said, "It's our pleasure to support you, Your Royal Highness. We believe in the work you're doing." The words were simple, but their meaning was clear. The household staff who worked most closely with Catherine were choosing sides, and they were choosing hers. The news of Captain Hughes's transfer spread through the palace staff like wildfire, creating an undercurrent of tension that hadn't existed in decades. By the next morning, it seemed that every corridor conversation stopped when senior administrators appeared, and the usual easy interactions between different levels of staff had become noticeably strained.
Sarah Jenkins, who worked in the palace laundry and had developed a friendship with several security guards over her 8 years of service, found herself at the center of an unexpected network of communication. During her regular coffee break with Tom Bradley, a junior guard who had worked closely with David Hughes, she learned details about the transfer that made her blood boil.
They didn't just move him to a different detail, Tom explained quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. They've got him doing paperwork in the basement administrative office.
David Hughes, who served 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming here, who's been decorated for his service, is now filing reports about equipment maintenance. It's humiliating, and it's meant to be. Sarah had always prided herself on staying out of palace politics, focusing on her work and keeping her opinions to herself.
But something about this situation felt fundamentally wrong. She had observed Captain Hughes's professionalism and kindness during his years of service, had seen him take extra time to help new staff members understand palace procedures, and had witnessed his obvious respect for the royal family.
The idea that he was being punished for supporting the princess and making her own decisions struck her as not just unfair, but dangerous. "What do you think would happen if other people knew about this?" Sarah asked Tom, already formulating an idea that surprised her with its boldness.
Tom looked at her carefully, recognizing something new in her expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the other staff members knew exactly why Captain Hughes was transferred? What if they understood that this isn't really about protocol or proper procedures, but about punishing someone for treating the Princess of Wales like an adult capable of making her own decisions?" That afternoon, Sarah began what she would later describe as the most important conversations of her life. Starting with the housekeeping staff she knew best, she carefully shared the story of David's conversation with Catherine and his subsequent punishment. She was careful not to present it as gossip or complaint, but as information that people deserve to have when considering their own positions within the palace hierarchy. The reaction was swift and unanimous. Margaret O'Brien, who had worked in the palace kitchens for 12 years, listened to Sarah's account with growing anger. "So let me understand this correctly," Margaret said, her Irish accent thickening with emotion. "Captain Hughes is being punished for encouraging the princess to trust her own judgment about supporting Welsh rugby, and Sir Edmund thinks this is about maintaining proper order." Similar conversations were happening in every department of the palace. In the gardens, where staff members worked in relative isolation but gathered for their lunch breaks, the story spread among groundskeepers and maintenance workers who had their own experiences of bureaucratic overreach and administrative petty tyranny. In the security offices, guards who had served alongside David Hughes shared their outrage at seeing a respected colleague treated so poorly. But perhaps the most significant conversation happened in the administrative offices themselves, where junior staff members who processed paperwork and managed schedules began to understand how decisions were really being made about the royal family's activities.
These employees, often invisible to the senior administrators who gave them orders, had unique access to correspondence, meeting notes, and internal communications that revealed the extent of the control being exercised over Catherine's choices. Jennifer Walsh, a junior administrative assistant who had been with the palace for 3 years, found herself in possession of information that suddenly seemed much more significant than she had initially realized. As part of her duties, she processed correspondence between various departments about royal engagements and public appearances. In recent weeks, she had noticed an unusual volume of communication about the Princess of Wales's activities, with multiple departments weighing in on decisions that had previously been handled more routinely. Reading through the files with new understanding, Jennifer began to see a pattern of increasingly restrictive oversight of Catherine's choices. The rugby invitation wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader effort to limit the princess's independence in ways that seemed to go far beyond normal protocol considerations. There were memos questioning her selection of charities to support, correspondence about limiting her media appearances, and discussions about requiring pre-approval for her personal statements on social issues. Jennifer had always admired the Princess of Wales both for her public work and for her personal kindness to staff members. During a palace tour for employees' families the previous year, Catherine had taken extra time to speak with Jennifer's young daughter, asking about her school and interests with genuine curiosity and warmth. The idea that this same person was being micromanaged and second-guessed at every turn seemed not just wrong but counterproductive to everything the royal family was supposed to represent. Meanwhile, Catherine herself was beginning to understand the broader implications of her decision to accept the rugby invitation. During her regular weekly meeting with James Morrison, her private secretary, she noticed a new formality in their interactions. James, who had always been professional but approachable, now seemed careful to document every conversation and hesitant to offer personal opinions about upcoming engagements. "James," Catherine said during a particularly stilted discussion about her schedule for the following month, "you seem different lately. Is everything all right?" James hesitated, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. Finally, he said carefully, "Your Royal Highness, I think it's important for you to know that your decision regarding the rugby patronage has generated significant discussion among the senior staff. Some people feel that it represents a concerning precedent about decision-making processes." Catherine felt a chill of understanding. "By some people you mean Sir Edmund and his allies. I think it would be inappropriate for me to characterize anyone's position," James replied, but his tone confirmed Catherine's suspicion. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door, and Mary Thompson entered to refresh the tea service. As she worked, Catherine noticed that Mary seemed to be taking longer than usual, carefully arranging the china and straightening papers that didn't need straightening. When James excused himself to take a phone call, Mary approached Catherine with the kind of directness that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. "Your Royal Highness," Mary said quietly, "I hope you don't mind me speaking out of turn, but the staff wanted you to know that we support your decision about the rugby, and we think what's being done to Captain Hughes is wrong." Catherine felt her heart race. The fact that Mary was speaking so openly suggested that something significant was happening among the palace staff, something that went far beyond normal workplace dynamics. "What exactly is being done to Captain Hughes?" Catherine asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Mary glanced toward the door to ensure James was still on his call, then said quickly, "He's been transferred to basement administrative duties as punishment for supporting your decision. The word among the staff is that it's meant to send a message to anyone else who might consider putting your interests ahead of Sir Edmund's preferences." The confirmation of what Catherine had suspected hit her like a physical blow. David Hughes, who had shown her respect and support when she needed it most, was being punished for his loyalty. The institutional machinery she had married into was not just limiting her choices but actively punishing those who supported her right to make them.
"Mary?" Catherine said carefully, "what you're telling me could get you in serious trouble if certain people knew about this conversation." Mary straightened, her years of service evident in her composed bearing.
"With respect, Your Royal Highness, I think we're all in serious trouble if we don't start speaking up for what's right. The people who work closest with you every day can see what kind of person you are and how hard you work. It's not right for you to be treated like you can't be trusted to make good decisions." When James returned to the office, he found Catherine staring out the window with an expression he had never seen before. There was a determination in her posture that suggested something fundamental had changed, and when she turned to address him, he could hear steel in her voice. "James, I want you to arrange a meeting with Sir Edmund for tomorrow morning, and I want you to invite Captain Hughes to attend as well." "Your Royal Highness," James began carefully, "I'm not sure that's advisable given the current circumstances. I'm not asking for advice about whether it's advisable, Catherine replied firmly. I'm giving you instructions for my schedule.
Please make the arrangements. The next morning, Sir Edmund arrived at Catherine's private office, expecting a routine briefing about upcoming engagements. Instead, he found the princess seated behind her desk with an expression of quiet authority that immediately put him on alert. When Captain Hughes entered the room a few minutes later, Sir Edmund's surprise quickly turned to irritation.
Your Royal Highness, Sir Edmund began. I'm not sure it's appropriate for Captain Hughes to be present for our administrative discussions given his recent transfer to different duties. Catherine looked directly at Sir Edmund, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. Captain Hughes is here because I requested his presence.
I understand that he has been transferred from his position on my security detail as a result of offering me counsel regarding the rugby invitation. I find this unacceptable.
Sir Edmund's face reddened slightly, but he maintained his composure. Your Royal Highness, Captain Hughes exceeded his authority by providing advice outside his area of responsibility. The transfer was necessary to maintain proper boundaries and chain of command. This is the book. It's about history. Your Royal Highness, Captain Hughes exceeded his authority by providing advice outside his area of responsibility. The transfer was necessary to maintain proper boundaries and chain of command.
His area of responsibility, Catherine replied, is my safety and security. I believe that includes protecting me from decisions that are harmful to my relationship with the people I serve.
Captain Hughes's advice was sound, his approach was respectful, and his concerns were valid. The punishment he has received serves no purpose except to intimidate other staff members who might consider putting my interests above administrative convenience.
The room fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Sir Edmund was clearly struggling with how to respond to such direct criticism from a member of the royal family. In his experience, these conversations involved careful diplomatic language and indirect suggestions, not explicit challenges to his authority. Your Royal Highness, he said finally, the systems and protocols we have in place exist to protect the institution and ensure that decisions are made with full consideration of their implications. When those systems are bypassed, it creates risks that extend far beyond any individual situation. David Hughes, who had remained silent during this exchange, felt compelled to speak. Sir Edmund, with respect, the princess's decision to accept the rugby patronage has generated tremendous positive response from the Welsh public. The concerns about political implications appear to have been unfounded, and the decision has actually strengthened her connection with the people she serves.
Sir Edmund turned toward David with barely controlled anger. Captain Hughes, you are here at the princess's request, but you are not authorized to participate in policy discussions.
Your opinion about public response is irrelevant to the broader institutional considerations.
But Catherine had heard enough. Standing from her desk, she moved to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where she could see staff members going about their daily duties. When she turned back to face the room, her expression carried the weight of decision. Sir Edmund, I want Captain Hughes restored to his position on my security detail immediately.
Furthermore, I want to make clear to all palace staff that providing thoughtful counsel and honest feedback is not only acceptable but encouraged. I cannot do my job effectively if the people around me are afraid to tell me the truth or offer perspectives that might differ from official talking points.
The confrontation had reached a point that Sir Edmund had not anticipated. In his decades of palace service, he had rarely faced such direct resistance from members of the royal family. The traditional deference to administrative expertise and institutional wisdom was being challenged by someone who clearly intended to exercise real authority over her own affairs. Your Royal Highness, Sir Edmund said carefully, I will need to discuss these requests with the other senior administrators and consider their implications for palace operations. These are not requests, Catherine replied. They are decisions. Captain Hughes will return to his duties on my security detail tomorrow morning. And you will ensure that all staff members understand that honest communication and thoughtful advice are valued, not punished. After Sir Edmund left the office, Catherine and David found themselves alone for the first time since their conversation in the library had started this entire chain of events. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air between them. Your Royal Highness, David said quietly, I want you to know that I never intended to create this kind of conflict within your household. Catherine smiled, for the first time in days, feeling a sense of relief and purpose that had been missing since this whole situation began. David, you didn't create this conflict. You simply exposed it. And sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Word of the confrontation with Sir Edmund spread through the palace staff with remarkable speed, carried by the same informal networks that had shared news of David's punishment just days earlier.
But this time, the news carried a different energy. For the first time in memory, a member of the royal family had explicitly stood up for the staff members who supported them, challenging the administrative hierarchy that often treated personal service as subservience.
In the housekeeping department, Mary Thompson shared the news with her colleagues during their afternoon break. The princess made it clear that she values honest advice and won't tolerate people being punished for providing it, Mary explained.
She's not just talking about supporting us, she's actually doing it. The impact was immediate and visible throughout the palace. Staff members who had been walking carefully and speaking in whispers began to move with more confidence. Conversations between different departments became more open and collaborative. Most importantly, interactions between staff and the senior administrators began to shift as word spread that the Princess of Wales had explicitly challenged attempts to intimidate or silence her supporters. But perhaps the most significant change was in Catherine herself. The experience of standing up to Sir Edmund, of explicitly defending David Hughes and articulating her expectations for how staff should be treated, had awakened something in her that had been dormant since her early days as a royal. She remembered why she had been excited about the opportunity to serve, why she believed in the potential of the monarchy to make a positive difference in people's lives. That evening, as she reviewed her upcoming schedule with James Morrison, Catherine noticed that her private secretary seemed more relaxed and engaged than he had been in weeks.
James, she said during a pause in their discussion, I want you to know that I value your advice and perspective. I hope you never feel that you need to hide your honest opinions from me out of concern for how they might be received by others.
James looked up from his notes with evident relief. Thank you, Your Royal Highness.
I have to admit that recent weeks have been challenging as I've tried to balance various expectations and pressures. It's reassuring to know that you want honest communication rather than just confirmation of predetermined positions. As Catherine prepared for bed that night, she reflected on how quickly things had changed and how much more they would likely change in the days ahead. Sir Edmund and his allies were not going to accept this challenge to their authority quietly, and she knew that standing up for her principles would come with costs and complications.
But for the first time since receiving that rugby invitation, Catherine felt like herself again. She had remembered that being Princess of Wales meant more than following scripts and protocols written by others.
It meant using her position to support people and causes she believed in, even when that meant challenging the systems and people who preferred royal family members to be seen rather than heard, admired rather than respected, and managed rather than trusted. The days following Catherine's confrontation with Sir Edmund brought unexpected changes throughout the palace.
Staff members who had worked in careful isolation for years began finding reasons to collaborate across departments, sharing information and perspectives in ways that hadn't happened in living memory. The invisible barriers that had separated different levels of the hierarchy were beginning to crack, revealing relationships and alliances that surprised even the participants.
Jennifer Walsh, the junior administrative assistant who had become increasingly aware of the restrictive oversight being placed on Catherine's activities, found herself at the center of these changes. Her access to interdepartmental correspondence had given her a unique understanding of how decisions were really made, and she began to realize that her position, while junior, provided her with information that could be valuable to others who were trying to understand the broader patterns of palace politics.
During a chance encounter in the staff dining hall, Jennifer found herself sitting across from Tom Bradley, the security guard who had been David Hughes's close colleague. Their conversation began casually, but as Tom described his frustration with the way David had been treated, Jennifer recognized an opportunity to share information that could help people understand what was really happening.
Tom, Jennifer said carefully, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. I think there are things you should know about how decisions have been made regarding the Princess of Wales's activities. Things that go beyond just the rugby invitation.
Over the next hour, Jennifer shared details from the administrative files she processed daily. The picture that emerged was of a systematic effort to limit Catherine's independence, with Sir Edmund and his allies questioning her judgment on everything from charity selections to public statements. The rugby invitation hadn't been an isolated incident, but rather the moment when Catherine finally pushed back against a pattern of control that had been building for months. Tom listened with growing anger, recognizing that David's punishment was part of a broader campaign to ensure that palace staff supported administrative control rather than the royal family members they were supposed to serve.
This isn't about maintaining proper protocol, Tom realized aloud. It's about making sure the princess knows her place in their version of how things should work. Word of Jennifer's revelation spread through the staff networks that had been energized by the recent confrontations. In the palace kitchens, Margaret O'Brien shared the information with her colleagues during the evening meal preparation.
It's not just that they disagreed with her about rugby, Margaret explained to the assembled cooks and servers. They've been second-guessing everything she does, treating her like she can't be trusted to make basic decisions about her own work. The kitchen staff, who had regular opportunities to observe the royal family during meal service and private events, had their own perspective on Catherine's character and judgment.
They had seen her genuine interactions with visiting dignitaries, her thoughtful questions about menu planning for charity events, and her consistent courtesy towards staff members at all levels. The idea that such a person needed constant supervision and control struck them as not just wrong but ridiculous. Similar conversations were happening throughout the palace. In the stables, where Catherine was a frequent visitor who took genuine interest in the horses and their care, grooms and riding instructors shared their own observations about her knowledge and good judgment. In the gardens, where she often walked and asked thoughtful questions about the plantings and maintenance, groundskeepers expressed their respect for someone who clearly understood the complexity and importance of their work. But it was in the housekeeping department, where Mary Thompson had become an unofficial leader of the pro-Catherine faction, that the most significant organizing was taking place.
Mary had been thinking carefully about how staff members could show their support for the princess in ways that went beyond private conversations and informal networks.
The thing is, Mary explained to a group of housekeeping staff during their weekly team meeting, we all see how hard the princess works and how much she cares about doing a good job.
But the people making decisions about her schedule and activities don't spend time with her the way we do. They don't see her staying late to finish correspondence, or taking extra time to prepare for engagements, or asking thoughtful questions about the people she's going to meet.
Sarah Jenkins, who had played a key role in spreading information about David Hughes's situation, raised her hand with a question. What exactly are you suggesting we do?
We can't exactly march into Sir Edmund's office and demand changes. Mary smiled, having anticipated this question. Actually, I think we can do something more effective than that.
We can document what we observe, create a record of the princess's actual work and judgment that contradicts the narrative being used to justify controlling her decisions. The idea was both simple and revolutionary.
Instead of relying on administrative assessments and political calculations, the staff members who worked most closely with Catherine would compile evidence of her competence, dedication, and good judgment based on their direct observations.
It'd be a grassroots evaluation of royal performance, written by the people who were in the best position to judge effectiveness and character. Over the next week, an extraordinary project began to take shape.
Housekeeping staff documented Catherine's preparation for events, her attention to detail, and her consideration for their work schedules when planning activities. Kitchen staff recorded her dietary restrictions and preferences, noting how she accommodated visiting dignitaries and adapted to changing circumstances without complaint. Security personnel observed her interactions with the public, her adherence to safety protocols, and her ability to handle unexpected situations with grace and composure. Jennifer Walsh, with her access to administrative files, began compiling a parallel record of the restrictions and oversight being placed on Catherine's activities.
The contrast was striking. While the official administrative record suggested a princess who needed constant guidance and supervision, the staff observations revealed someone who was thoughtful, well-prepared, and highly competent in her royal duties.
David Hughes, restored to his position on Catherine's security detail, found himself in a unique position to observe both sides of this developing situation. His military experience had taught him to recognize when institutional systems were working effectively and when they had become obstacles to mission accomplishment.
What he was seeing at the palace increasingly resembled the latter. During a routine security briefing, David shared his observations with Tom Bradley and several other guards who had become part of the informal support network for Catherine.
The thing that strikes me, David said, is how much time and energy is being spent on managing the princess instead of supporting her work.
From a security perspective, she's one of the most naturally careful and situationally aware people I've ever protected. But from an administrative perspective, she's being treated like someone who can't be trusted to cross the street safely.
These conversations were taking place against the backdrop of Catherine's own growing confidence and assertiveness. The success of her rugby patronage announcement, which had generated overwhelmingly positive public response and media coverage, had validated her judgment in ways that undermined the administrative arguments for greater control. The Welsh public had embraced her support with enthusiasm, and the English rugby community had responded with respect and appreciation for her inclusive approach to the sport. But perhaps more importantly, Catherine was beginning to understand the extent of support she had among the people who worked most closely with her.
The discreet comments, encouraging glances, and small gestures of solidarity were adding up to something she had never expected. A staff that was willing to advocate for her rather than simply follow orders from above. This became dramatically clear during a situation that arose when Sir Edmund attempted to cancel one of Catherine's scheduled visits to a children's hospital in Cardiff.
The visit had been planned for months, with extensive coordination between the palace,
the hospital, and local security services. But 2 days before the scheduled engagement, Sir Edmund declared that the visit needed to be postponed due to scheduling conflicts and resource constraints. Catherine knew immediately that this was retaliation for her challenges to his authority. The scheduling conflicts were manufactured, and the resource constraints were a euphemism for Sir Edmund's desire to demonstrate that he still controlled her calendar.
When she expressed her displeasure to James Morrison, her private secretary, she discovered that the staff support network had been monitoring this situation as well. "Your Royal Highness," James said carefully, "I should inform you that several departments have expressed concerns about this cancellation. The hospital has been preparing for months, the local community has been looking forward to your visit, and the logistics teams report that all arrangements are proceeding smoothly. The stated reasons for postponement don't align with the operational realities." Catherine felt a surge of gratitude for James's careful but clear message of support. "What you're telling me, James, is that this cancellation is unnecessary from a practical standpoint. That appears to be the assessment of the people actually responsible for implementing the visit," James replied diplomatically. That afternoon, Catherine made a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Instead of accepting the cancellation and working through official channels to reschedule, she instructed James to inform all relevant parties that the Cardiff visit would proceed as planned. Furthermore, she requested that any concerns about the decision be directed to her personally rather than resolved through administrative channels. The response was swift and telling.
Within hours, Catherine received a call from Sir Edmund expressing his grave concerns about her decision to override administrative guidance. But she also received discreet messages of support from security coordinators, logistics planners, and communication staff who had been working on the Cardiff visit and believed it should proceed as scheduled. Most significantly, Mary Thompson approached Catherine that evening with something unprecedented in palace history: a formal letter of support signed by 23 staff members from various departments throughout the palace.
The letter, written in careful but unmistakably direct language, expressed the staff's confidence in Catherine's judgment and their belief that her decisions deserved the support rather than the resistance of the palace administration.
"Your Royal Highness," Mary said as she presented the letter, "we wanted you to know that the people who work with you every day believe in your ability to make good decisions.
We see how hard you work, how much you care about the people you meet, and how thoughtfully you approach your responsibilities. We think you deserve better support from the people whose job it is to help you succeed." Catherine read the letter with growing emotion, recognizing names of staff members from every corner of palace operations. These weren't political activists or troublemakers, but dedicated professionals who had risked their careers to express support for someone they believed in.
The letter represented something that had never existed before in the modern royal household: organized staff advocacy for a member of the royal family against the administrative hierarchy. The Cardiff visit took place as scheduled and was an overwhelming success. Catherine's interactions with the young patients, their families, and the hospital staff generated positive media coverage and genuine public enthusiasm. But more importantly for palace dynamics, the visit demonstrated Catherine's ability to make decisions that served both her royal duties and the people she was meant to serve. The success of the Cardiff visit, combined with the staff letter of support, marked a turning point in the power dynamics within the palace. Sir Edmund and his allies found themselves in the unprecedented position of having their authority explicitly challenged by both a member of the royal family and the staff members who were supposed to implement their decisions. The situation came to a head during a meeting of the senior palace officials that Catherine had not been invited to attend, but which she learned about through the staff network that had become her most reliable source of information about internal politics. According to Jennifer Walsh, who processed the meeting notes, Sir Edmund had proposed implementing new protocols that would require all royal activities to be approved through a formal committee process, effectively removing individual judgment from royal decision-making. The proposal was presented as a modernization of palace operations, but everyone involved understood its real purpose: to institutionalize the control that Sir Edmund had been trying to exercise informally. Under the new system, Catherine's desire to accept a rugby patronage or visit a children's hospital would be subject to committee approval, with Sir Edmund and his allies holding effective veto power over royal activities. When Catherine learned about this proposal, she realized that the conflict had reached a point where compromise was no longer possible. Either she would accept a role as a managed symbol, with no real authority over her own activities, or she would need to use whatever power and support she had to establish her right to make meaningful decisions about her royal duties. That evening, Catherine made a call that surprised even her own supporters. She contacted Prince William, who was traveling on a separate engagement, and asked him to return to the palace for an urgent discussion about household operations. For the first time since this conflict began, Catherine was preparing to escalate the situation beyond the palace staff and administrative hierarchy to the level of senior royal family decision-making.
The call to William represented Catherine's recognition that individual acts of resistance, while satisfying and symbolically important, would not be sufficient to address the systematic problems she had uncovered. If the staff members who supported her were going to be protected from retaliation, and if she was going to be able to fulfill her royal duties effectively, she would need to address these issues at the highest levels of royal family governance.
As she prepared for William's return and the conversations that would follow, Catherine reflected on how much had changed since she had received that rugby invitation just weeks earlier. What had started as a simple decision about sports patronage had revealed fundamental questions about the nature of royal duty, the relationship between individual judgment and institutional control, and the role of staff members who were caught between competing loyalties.
The woman who had once accepted administrative guidance without question had discovered her own voice and the support of people who believed in her ability to use it wisely. The question now was whether that voice would be strong enough to reshape the systems and relationships that governed royal life, or whether the institutional pressures that had controlled royal behavior for generations would ultimately reassert themselves.
The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Catherine's future role within the royal family, but the nature of modern monarchy itself. Prince William arrived at the palace on a gray Thursday morning, his expression serious as he made his way through corridors that felt different from when he had left just a week earlier.
The usual atmosphere of quiet efficiency had been replaced by something more dynamic and unpredictable. Staff members moved with a sense of purpose that went beyond routine duties, and there was an energy in the air that suggested significant changes were underway. Catherine met him in their private sitting room, a space that had always been a refuge from the formal protocols that govern most palace interactions.
But even here, the conversation that was about to take place would reshape their understanding of what it meant to be working members of the royal family in the 21st century. Catherine began, her voice carrying a confidence that reflected the transformation she had undergone over the past weeks. We need to talk about how this household operates and whether the current systems are serving the purposes they're supposed to serve. As Catherine described the events that had unfolded since the rugby invitation, William listened with growing concern and surprise.
He had always understood that palace operations involve complex politics and competing interests, but he had assumed that these dynamics were managed in ways that supported rather than hindered the royal family's ability to serve the public effectively. The revelation that Catherine had been subjected to increasingly restrictive oversight, that staff members were being punished for providing honest counsel, and that administrative officials were attempting to institutionalize even greater control over royal activities, struck William as both troubling and counterproductive.
Let me make sure I understand this correctly, William said when Catherine finished her account. Sir Edmund and his allies believe that you cannot be trusted to make appropriate decisions about sports patronages, charity visits, and public statements, so they want to create a committee system that would give them veto power over your activities. Catherine nodded, appreciating that William immediately grasped the fundamental issue at stake.
It's not really about specific decisions, she explained. It's about whether members of the royal family are trusted to exercise judgment based on their understanding of their duties and the people they serve, or whether we're expected to be managed symbols who implement decisions made by others.
William had his own experiences with palace bureaucracy and administrative oversight, but he began to realize that Catherine's situation was different in both scope and intensity. As the heir to the throne, William's decisions carried constitutional implications that justified careful review and consultation.
But Catherine's activities as Princess of Wales were more focused on charitable work, community engagement, and cultural patronages that should have allowed for greater personal discretion and flexibility.
What kind of support do you have for addressing these issues? William asked, beginning to understand that this conversation would lead to actions rather than just discussion.
Catherine smiled for the first time since William's arrival, thinking about the staff letter that had meant so much to her, and the network of relationships that had developed over the past weeks. That's one of the most encouraging aspects of this entire situation.
The people who work most closely with me, who see how I approach my responsibilities and how I interact with the public, have been incredibly supportive. They understand what I'm trying to accomplish, and they believe in my ability to do it well.
The next several hours brought a series of meetings and conversations that would later be remembered as a turning point in modern royal operations. William spoke individually with James Morrison, David Hughes, Mary Thompson, and several other staff members who had played key roles in supporting Catherine during her conflict with the administrative hierarchy. What emerged from these conversations was a picture of institutional dysfunction that went far beyond personality conflicts or policy disagreements. The administrative systems that were supposed to support royal work had become obstacles to effective service.
Staff members who were supposed to provide advice and assistance had been intimidated into providing only compliance and confirmation. Most significantly, the people who were in the best position to observe and assess royal effectiveness had been excluded from decision-making processes in favor of officials whose primary concern was maintaining their own authority.
David Hughes, speaking with military directness that William appreciated, summarized the situation clearly. Your Royal Highnesses, the current system is not serving the mission. The Princess of Wales is highly competent, well-prepared, and effective in her interactions with the public. But instead of supporting and enhancing her capabilities, the administrative hierarchy is treating her competence as a threat to their control. That's not sustainable, and it's not serving the interests of the monarchy or the people you're meant to serve. Mary Thompson, despite her nervousness about speaking so directly to two senior royals, offered a perspective that proved equally valuable. What the staff has observed, she told William and Catherine, is that when the princess is trusted to make her own decisions and given proper support to implement them, the results are consistently positive. The Cardiff Hospital visit, the Rugby patronage, and many other activities have been successful because they reflect her genuine interests and her understanding of what people want from the royal family. By the end of the day, William had reached conclusions that would have seemed impossible when he arrived that morning. The administrative systems that he had assumed were protecting the royal family were actually undermining their effectiveness. The staff members he had viewed primarily as service providers were actually valuable sources of insight and feedback. Most importantly, Catherine's conflict with Sir Edmund was not a personal dispute, but a fundamental disagreement about how the monarchy should operate in the modern world. That evening, William and Catherine requested a meeting with Sir Edmund and the other senior administrators to discuss the future of palace operations. The meeting, held in the formal conference room that had been the site of so many previous confrontations, brought together all the key players in a drama that had been building for weeks. Sir Edmund arrived expecting to brief the royal couple on his proposed committee system for managing royal activities. Instead, he found himself facing a unified front that was prepared to challenge the basic assumptions that had guided his approach to royal administration. Sir Edmund, William began, his tone carrying the authority of someone who would someday be king. We've been reviewing recent events and discussing palace operations with various staff members. We have significant concerns about the current approach to managing royal activities and the treatment of staff members who provide counsel and support. The next hour brought a conversation unlike any that had taken place in living memory between senior royals and palace administrators. William and Catherine, supported by the staff insights they had gathered, systematically challenged the restrictions, oversight mechanisms, and control systems that had been implemented around Catherine's activities. The Rugby invitation, they pointed out, had generated overwhelmingly positive public response and had strengthened Catherine's connection to Wales and Welsh culture. The Cardiff Hospital visit had been a meaningful success that had brought joy to sick children and positive attention to important healthcare work. The staff members who had supported these decisions had demonstrated good judgment and appropriate loyalty to the royal family. In contrast, the administrative resistance to these activities had served no constructive purpose and had created unnecessary conflict and inefficiency. The proposed committee system would further bureaucratize royal work without improving its effectiveness or public impact. Sir Edmund, clearly struggling to adapt to this unprecedented challenge to his authority, attempted to defend his approach by emphasizing the importance of institutional stability and traditional procedures. But his arguments increasingly sounded like rationalizations for a system that prioritized administrative control over royal effectiveness. The turning point came when Catherine addressed Sir Edmund directly, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had discovered over the past weeks. Sir Edmund, I want to be very clear about something. My role as Princess of Wales is not to be managed by you or anyone else. It is to serve the British people and the Commonwealth in ways that reflect both royal tradition and contemporary needs. That requires judgment, discretion, and the ability to make decisions based on my understanding of the people and causes I represent. She continued. The staff members who work most closely with me understand this, which is why they have been so supportive of decisions that you have opposed. They see the positive results of trusting royal judgment rather than substituting administrative control for individual responsibility. The confrontation concluded with William announcing changes that would reshape palace operations fundamentally. The proposed committee system was rejected entirely. Catherine would have full authority to make decisions about her patronages, charitable activities, and public appearances, with administrative support rather than administrative oversight. Staff members would be encouraged to provide honest counsel and feedback without fear of retaliation. Most significantly, Sir Edmund was informed that his approach to managing royal activities was inconsistent with the family's expectations
and that he would need to adapt his methods or consider whether his position remained appropriate. The weeks that followed brought remarkable changes throughout the palace.
The day, with the threat of retaliation removed, staff members began communicating more openly across departments and hierarchical levels. The artificial barriers between different types of palace work dissolved, as everyone focused on supporting royal activities rather than managing royal behavior.
Catherine found herself working with greater energy and effectiveness than she had experienced since joining the royal family. Free from constant second-guessing and administrative interference, she was able to pursue patronages and activities that reflected her genuine interests and her understanding of contemporary needs. The rugby patronage led to additional sports-related activities that connected her with young people throughout the UK. The Cardiff Hospital visit became the first in a series of healthcare-focused engagements that highlighted important medical research and patient care innovations. But perhaps the most significant change was in the relationship between the royal family and the staff members who supported their work. The traditional distance and formality gave way to collaborative relationships built on mutual respect and shared commitment to effective public service.
Mary Thompson, who had played such a crucial role in organizing staff support for Catherine, found herself in a new position as head of household coordination. Responsible for ensuring that staff insights and observations informed royal planning and decision-making. David Hughes was promoted to Chief of Personal Security, with expanded responsibilities that reflected the value of his judgment and his commitment to protecting royal interests in the broadest sense.
Jennifer Walsh, whose access to administrative files had provided crucial information about the scope of bureaucratic overreach, was moved to a senior position in royal communications, where her understanding of both administrative processes and public relations proved invaluable. The changes extended beyond individual promotions and new positions.
Regular meetings were established between royal family members and staff representatives to ensure ongoing communication about operational issues and opportunities for improvement. Staff members were explicitly encouraged to provide feedback about royal activities and suggestions for enhanced effectiveness. Most importantly, the culture of fear and intimidation that had developed around dissent and independent thinking was replaced by an environment that valued diverse perspectives and creative problem-solving. The public never learned the full details of the internal palace revolution that had been triggered by a rugby invitation.
But they did notice changes in how the royal family operated. Catherine's activities became more varied and engaging, reflecting her personal interests while serving important public purposes. Her interactions with staff and the public seemed more natural and spontaneous. Most significantly, her obvious enthusiasm for her royal duties translated into more effective and impactful public service. Sir Edmund, faced with a choice between adapting to the new environment or leaving palace service, chose the latter. His departure was announced as a routine retirement, but within palace circles, everyone understood that it marked the end of an era of administrative dominance over royal decision-making. His replacement, selected after consultation with both royal family members and staff representatives, was someone who understood that the purpose of palace administration was to support and enhance royal work rather than to control and limit it. The rugby match that had started this entire chain of events took place on a crisp autumn afternoon in Cardiff, with Catherine serving proudly as patron of the Welsh team. She watched from the royal box as Wales defeated England in a thrilling match that showcased the skill, determination, and sportsmanship that had drawn her to rugby in the first place. During the post-match reception, Catherine was approached by a young Welsh player who thanked her for her support of the team and the sport. "Your Royal Highness," the player said, "having your patronage means everything to us. It shows that you understand what rugby means to our community and our culture." Catherine smiled, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. "Rugby is a sport that requires both individual skill and team cooperation," she replied. "I think those same qualities are important in any kind of meaningful work, whether it's sports or royal service or anything else that matters to people." As she spoke, Catherine was aware of David Hughes standing at his post nearby, alert and professional as always, but also relaxed in the knowledge that his loyalty and judgment were valued rather than feared. She could see Mary Thompson coordinating with the event staff, ensuring that everything ran smoothly, while maintaining the warm relationships that made such events successful. The young rugby player moved on to speak with other guests, but his words stayed with Catherine as she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. What had started as a simple desire to support a sport she loved had become something much larger, a transformation in how she understood her role, her relationships, and her responsibility to use her position effectively. That evening, as Catherine and William drove back to the palace through the Welsh countryside, they talked about the broader implications of the changes they had implemented. The staff revolution that had begun with the rugby invitation had revealed possibilities for royal service that neither of them had previously imagined.
The most important thing we've learned, Catherine observed, is that the people who work closest to us often have the best understanding of how to make our work more effective. We spent so much time listening to administrators and experts that we forgot to pay attention to the people who actually see the results of what we do.
William nodded, thinking about how these insights might apply to his own future role and responsibilities. It makes me wonder how many other opportunities we've missed because we were too focused on following procedures instead of achieving results. As their car pulled through the palace gates, Catherine saw staff members going about their evening duties with the sense of purpose and engagement that had become the new normal since the changes had been implemented.
These were people who understood that their work mattered, that their insights were valued, and that their loyalty was reciprocated by the royal family they served. The rugby invitation that had started everything was now framed on Catherine's desk, not as a trophy of conflict won, but as a reminder of what became possible when people were trusted to make good decisions and supported in implementing them effectively.
Next to it sat the staff letter that had meant so much during the difficult weeks of transition, the testament to the relationships and mutual respect that had made real change possible. The story that had begun with institutional resistance to a princess's desire to support Welsh rugby had become something much larger. A demonstration that even the most traditional and hierarchical institutions could be transformed when people were willing to challenge systems that no longer served their intended purposes.
For Catherine, the transformation was both personal and professional. She had discovered her own voice and learned to trust her own judgment while building relationships with the people who made her work possible.
She had learned that being Princess of Wales meant more than following scripts written by others. It meant using her position to serve people and causes she believed in, supported by people who shared her commitment to making a positive difference. The palace would never be the same, and that was exactly what everyone involved had hoped to achieve.